Today we have assembled to release a booklet written by Brigadier R.P. Singh and Mr. Hitesh Singh. Coming to the topic of today's, you can say, booklet release, that is about, you can say, role of Pakistan Army in 1971 Bangladesh genocide. People have very short memories. Even in the, you can say, era of bombardment of information and very refined and very fast communication technology, we generally, you can say, worry about what is happening today or what happened yesterday. We forget, generally we forget what happened, you can say, few days ago, few years ago. There are many things which have been taught to people in India, in history, in modern history and others. But this particular genocide which took place in Bangladesh, it is something a lot many Indians are totally unaware of. For Indians, some Bangladeshi people came to India in 71 war, and the government of India provided them, you can say, some relief camps and facilities. But what had actually happened in Bangladesh or East Pakistan at that time is something we need to, you can say, understand. And this particular effort by Brigadier R.P. Singh and Mr. Hitesh Singh to inform and to sensitize the readers about the barbaric, you can say, tendencies which appear and which took place not so long ago. It's hardly, you can say, less than 50 years ago, 48 years only. What had happened, we all know, in 1947, India was divided. The western part, the Punjab and few other regions, Sindh, etc., became part of West Pakistan, and a part from the eastern India separated from Bengal, and that became East Pakistan. Interestingly, the distance between East Pakistan and West Pakistan was more than 1,000 miles. It could be around, you can say, 1,600 to 1,700 kilometers. But people on both the sides wanted a separate nation on the basis of religion. And that's how Pakistan came into being. Bengal got divided. The linguistic unity in Bengal that got shattered, and the religious affinity became the paramount. But then, very soon, after Pakistan came into existence, after much of bloodshed, we all know about that, the people in the West Pakistan, they started treating the people from the East Pakistan as if they were inferior people. They were secondary citizens. Their demands, their language, their issues, their representation in the policy making, everything got ignored. And people in the East, they continued to agitate, they continued to raise their demands. In 1970, a nationwide election was 71, I probably, 70, December 70, thank you, sir. Nationwide election in Pakistan took place, in which Awami League, led by Mujibur Rahman, got the maximum number of seats. In fact, it got the majority in the Pakistan parliament, and probably that was the first proper election in the history of Pakistan after it got independence. Or in fact, it got freedom, came into existence. But the people in the Western Pakistan, the Punjabis and others, they refused to give, you can say, transfer power to the people from the East Pakistan, despite, you can say, getting majority in the parliament. And this particular incident, you can say, it became a sort of tipping point. People in the East Pakistan, they have been demanding, you can say, that the language Bengali should be given the status, at least the second language status, because when Jinnah declared Urdu as the language, national language of Pakistan, hardly 3 to 4% people in Pakistan spoke that language. And here, the population was also more. In East Pakistan, there were 75 million people. In the West Pakistan, there were 55 million people. So people were more. Language was also popular. Representation was also there. Their cultural, their, not only that, in trade, in production, in industry, what we call the contribution to GDP was also much more. But the political power centered in the hands of people from the West Pakistan, not only in terms of political power, in terms of armed forces, authority and control also. So when Mujib was denied, you can say, his, what you can say is rightful power to lead Pakistan, the Bengalis got agitated. There were agitations, there were some clashes also, and probably some people lost their lives in those clashes in the eastern part of Pakistan. The people in the west, the armed forces, the president Yahya Khan, the leader Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and the generals, they decided to teach a lesson to people in the East Pakistan, to the Bengalis. And people quote that a journal remarked that kill 3 million Bengalis and all of them will fall in line. 3 million, 30 lakh, imagine. They said kill them. And that's how on the midnight of, you can say, between 25th and 26th, Operation Searchlight was initiated by Pakistani armed forces in the eastern part of Pakistan. And innocent people, students, intellectuals, lawyers, doctors, they were killed en masse. There are, you can say, conflicting reports, but thousands of people within few hours were killed by Pakistani armed forces. But then armed forces had the limitation in terms of numbers, in terms of reach, in terms of knowing the, you can say, hinterland. So they took help from the Islamic militias, Al-Badr and Al-Shams, Muslim League, which lost power to Awami League, Jamiyat, and other hardliners, some Maulanas, some other religious preachers. They also backed this genocide by Pakistani forces on Bengali people. Initially, they targeted and they wanted to kill and teach the lesson mainly to the Hindus living in the eastern Pakistan. And there are photographic evidence that's how Hindus were, you can say, taken to a side, and after inspecting whether they were circumcised or not, and they were killed on the spot. Hundreds and thousands of people were killed within few days. Millions of people were forced to run for safety to India. India had to provide relief, had to arrange for, you can say, camps, medicines, clothing, food. The worst part of this genocide was the genocidal rapes on the women. There are estimates that between 2 lakh to 4 lakh women were raped. And not merely raped, they were taken as sex slaves by Pakistani armies, by the Islamic militias, and they were gang raped for months kept hostages in the units, which led to unwanted pregnancies and unwanted deliveries also. It's a black dot on the face of, you can say, humanity. And the worst part was several countries, led by USA, kept on denying. Pakistani allies, they stood with Pakistan, despite, you can say, world media and some of the very, you can say, painful, hard-hitting reports by very courageous journalists highlighting the atrocities, the brutal murders, massacres. The powers in Washington didn't move. Finally, India had to intervene, troubled by influx of more than 1 crore refugees from eastern Pakistan. And as we know, within few days, Pakistani armed forces were defeated. Indian Army got support of Mukti Bahini, the freedom fighters from eastern parts of Pakistan. And that's how Bangladesh came into existence. Again, even after Bangladesh came into existence, and when it applied for membership for United Nations, China didn't allow it. Bangladesh and Indian Army had prisoners of war, Pakistani armed forces, soldiers and officers. And the newly formed government of Bangladesh, and definitely Bangladesh's people also, they wanted to punish those prisoners of war because they indulged in atrocities and massacre, this genocide of Bengali people. Majorly Hindus, but many Muslims also suffered at their hands. So this denial of United Nations membership and then capturing some of the Bengalis who were working or settled in the western parts of Pakistan, Bangladesh was, and Indian Army was forced to release those prisoners of war so that the people captured in the western part could be released and they could again travel back to the eastern parts. All this happened only 48 years ago. We don't read much about it, we don't discuss about it. Even today, when we see such tendencies taking place in West Asia, elsewhere, we all know how Yazidi people were tortured and they suffered, particularly Yazidi women at the hands of ISIS. We talk about, you can say, progress, we talk about our civilized society, our civil society, science, technology, global village, all sorts of things. But those tendencies of barbarianism are still there. And it's a big question mark before the humanity that the perpetrators of those crimes, of the genocide in Bangladesh in 1971 were never got punished. Can humanity, particularly the civil societies and the humanitarian organizations, put pressure on Pakistan to ensure that those people get punished? We have seen recently that people, even you can say in their 90s, were given punishment for their crimes, what they did under Hitler. This is not 1940s or 50s, we are talking about 1970s. unless that happens, the humanity owes a lot to people, particularly those Viranganas, brave women, and the kids, children, innocent children, who suffered a lot in Bangladesh. As I mentioned, and the writers have also highlighted, the biggest sufferer of this particular genocide in all conflicts, basically, we have seen the women are the main sufferer. They lose their parents, they lose their children, they lose their husbands, they lose their brothers, they lose their dignity, they lose properties, they lose everything. This barbarianism of inflicting pain and brutalities on helpless women, there is a history. It wasn't, you can say, recorded anywhere. When the Indian states used to fight amongst each other, there were clearly defined codes of conduct. After sunset, you should not touch a woman, you should not touch a child, you should not hit when a person is running away from you, never hit on the back. But when the barbarians started attacking Indian subcontinent in the beginning of the second millennia, the Indians didn't know how to react. Because they were killing kids, they were harming, they were taking women as slaves and inflicting all kinds of brutalities on children, on women, on even elderly people. As science progressed and humanity got in touch with each other and such brutalities were reported and read by and discussed, we thought, you can say, those days of medieval brutalities have been over. But Bangladesh genocide and then the brutalities on Yazidi women in recent times remind us that that barbaric mentality is still alive, and humanity must resist with all its might to curb, you can say, not only resist and to curb and to punish all such tendencies which feel that in any conflict target the women.